"Sign the papers, Evelyn, or the bank takes everything," my husband said, throwing a heavy manila envelope onto the kitchen table. He didn't know I was already holding the real deed, and the signature on his copy belonged to a dead man. He stood over me with the same practiced confidence he used in boardroom meetings, waiting for me to panic. He expected me to cry, to sign wherever he pointed, and to let him handle the dirty work just like he'd done for 24 years. He had no idea that 3 hours earlier, I had stood inside the Registrar of Deeds office, staring at a document that claimed I had willingly sold my late father's land 3 weeks ago. My name was at the bottom in dark blue ink. The slant was right, the loops were close, but the person who forged it made one fatal mistake: they didn't know how my father protected what was his. If you've ever watched someone you loved miscalculate just how sharp you really are, stay right here. Before we get into how this played out, take a quick moment to subscribe to Broken Trust Stories, where the truth always finds its way to the surface. Now, let me tell you how my husband thought he could erase me. At 51, I had spent nearly 30 years as an archivist for the County Historical Society. My entire life revolved around details that other people walked right past. I restored fragile letters, verified land titles from the 1800s, and cross-referenced tax ledgers. It was quiet work, but it taught me one fundamental truth: people leave paper trails, no matter how hard they try to hide them. My husband, Julian, lived in a completely different world. He was a commercial real estate consultant, a man who lived on handshakes, expensive suits, and the projection of success. To Julian, my job was a cute little hobby that paid for groceries, while his work was what kept us afloat in our suburban home. 4 years ago, my father passed away, leaving me Whispering Pines, a 6-acre parcel of land near the coast with a modest wood frame house built in 1952. It wasn't a mansion, but it sat right on the edge of an expanding coastal district. My father built it with his own hands, and it was the one place where I felt grounded. Julian had been dropping hints about selling it for months. "It's just sitting there, Evie," he would say during breakfast, not looking up from his tablet. "Property taxes are draining us. We could sell it, clear the remaining mortgage on this house, and put the rest into a high-yield fund." "It's not draining us," I would reply calmly. "I pay the property taxes out of my own account, Julian. And it's not for sale." He would sigh, shake his head, and treat me to the same condescending smile he gave his administrative assistants. His sister, Beatrice, was even worse. Whenever she came over for Sunday dinner, she made a point of talking about deadweight assets. "Evelyn is sentimental, Julian," Beatrice would say, sipping her wine while I cleared the dinner plates. "Some people just don't have a head for equity. It's fine for an archivist, but in the real world, hanging on to old wood is just financial foolishness." I never argued with Beatrice. In my line of work, you don't interrupt someone when they're making an assumption. You just let them keep talking while you gather the records. What Julian didn't know was that our marriage wasn't just stalling, it was failing under the weight of his hidden lifestyle. For the past year, Julian had been traveling more for client consultations. His phone was always face down on the counter. The mail, which used to sit in a basket near the front door, was suddenly being collected by Julian before I got home from the archive. He thought he was being subtle. But when a man who hasn't checked the mailbox since 2012 suddenly starts running out to the driveway at 4:30 p.m. every afternoon, you don't need to be a detective to know something has changed. The crack in Julian's polished world appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk at the Historical Society, indexing county surveyor maps from the mid-century, when I received a routine automated alert from the county property appraisers system. Years ago, when my father transferred Whispering Pines to me, I had set up a digital fraud notification on the parcel number, a free service offered to all county property owners that sends an email whenever a document is recorded against the title. The email was brief: "A notice of pending title transfer, Form 104B, has been filed for parcel 4408212, Whispering Pines." My hands went cold. I logged into the public records portal using my staff credentials. There it was. A preliminary deed transfer agreement, dated 14 days prior, listing the seller as Evelyn Vance and the buyer as Aegis Holdings LLC. The purchase price listed was $450,000, less than half of what the land was worth given the recent commercial rezoning proposals near the bypass. Attached to the record was a scan of a notarized power of attorney, giving Julian full authority to sign land transaction documents on my behalf due to my alleged incapacitation. At the bottom was my signature. I stared at the screen for 10 straight minutes. The signature was good. It had the slight tilt on the E, the elongated crossbar on the T, and the exact spacing I used when signing legal documents. Whoever traced it had used an original signature from one of my tax forms or our joint bank filings. But Julian had made a catastrophic error. He assumed Whispering Pines was registered under standard fee simple ownership in the Maine County Ledger. He didn't know that in 1998, when my father first realized the surrounding farms were being bought up by commercial developers, he visited a retired land attorney named Arthur Vance, my uncle. Together, they established the Whispering Pines Heritage Trust. The actual title wasn't held in my personal name, it was held by the trust, which required the dual signatures of the primary trustee, me, and the designated officer of the Historical Land Conservancy, my supervisor at work, Marcus Vance. Julian had filed a fake power of attorney against my personal name for a property that my personal name didn't legally control. Instead of screaming, instead of driving home and confronting him in the driveway, I printed every single page of the filing. I put them in a plain manila folder, walked into Marcus's office, and set them on his desk. Marcus looked at the documents, adjusted his glasses, and looked up at me. "Is this Julian?" "It's Julian," I said softly. "What do you want to do, Evelyn?" "I want to know who Aegis Holdings LLC is," I replied. "And then I want to let him think it worked." Over the next 3 days, I played the part of the unsuspecting, quiet wife. I cooked dinner. I listened to Julian talk about his stressful week. I watched him check his phone every 6 minutes under the edge of the dining table. Using the corporate registry database at work, I spent my lunch breaks digging into Aegis Holdings LLC. It took 4 layers of shell company filings, but the ultimate managing member of Aegis wasn't a corporate developer at all. It was Beatrice's husband, Richard, a man who had been out of work for 2 years, or so the family was told. Julian wasn't just selling my father's property out from under me to pay off his debts. He and his brother-in-law were buying it for $450,000 using a private loan, holding it under Aegis Holdings for 6 months until the county announced the commercial corridor expansion, and then reselling it to a regional strip mall developer for $1.8 million. They were going to strip me of my inheritance, keep the $1.3 million profit for themselves, and leave me with nothing while telling me the land had been lost to tax liens. That Friday evening, Julian brought out the envelope. "Sign the papers, Evelyn, or the bank takes everything," he said, setting it down with that heavy, performative sigh he'd been practicing all week. I tried to save Whispering Pines, but the back taxes and environmental assessments came through. The county is going to seize it next month if we don't clear the balance. I found a private buyer who's willing to take it off our hands for $450,000. It clears our debts and leaves us with a little cushion. I looked at the documents inside the envelope. They were formal closing papers, pre-signed by Aegis Holdings LLC, requiring my final signature to confirm the power of attorney transfer. "Where did you get these, Julian?" I asked gently. "I had my firm's legal team draft them," he lied without blinking. "Look, Evie, I know it hurts. Your dad loved that place. But we have to be practical. Beatrice agrees. We can't drag the whole family down for a piece of swampland." "Beatrice agrees?" I echoed. "She's looking out for us," Julian said, stepping closer and placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Just sign line B, and I'll take it to the title company tomorrow morning. Let me carry this load for you." I looked up at my husband. I looked at his clear blue eyes, his tailored shirt, and the smooth skin of a man who had never spent a day doing hard physical labor in his life. "I'll sign them at the title company tomorrow," I said softly. Julian froze. "What? No, there's no need for you to go down there. I have the notary lined up. It's just administrative nonsense." "If I'm saying goodbye to my father's land, Julian," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat, "I want to do it in person. Call the buyer. Tell them we'll meet at 10 a.m. at the First American Title building downtown." He hesitated. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was weighing the risk of pushing back against my sudden insistence against the risk of ruining the deal. "Fine," he said, narrowing his eyes. 10 a.m. But don't make a scene, Evelyn. These are serious business people. The conference room on the 4th floor of the title building smelled of stale coffee and carpet cleaner. Julian sat on my left, shifting uncomfortably in his chair and adjusting his watch every 2 minutes. Across from us sat Richard, wearing a sharp suit bought with money he claimed not to have, acting as the authorized representative of Aegis Holdings LLC. Beside Richard was Beatrice, who had insisted on coming for moral support. At the head of the table sat the escrow officer, a young woman named Sarah, who had a stack of 3-ring binders laid out before her. "All right," Sarah said, pulling the top folder toward her. "We're here to complete the conveyance of parcel 44082212 from Evelyn Vance to Aegis Holdings LLC. We have the preliminary power of attorney filed 3 weeks ago, and we just need Mrs. Vance's physical signature on the final deed covenants." Beatrice leaned across the table, offering a thin, condescending smile. "It's for the best, Evelyn. Honestly, holding on to old ghosts only holds you back." I looked at Richard. "Is Aegis Holdings prepared to wire the funds today?" "The escrow deposit is already in the holding account, Evelyn," Richard said smoothly. $450,000, minus closing fees. Clean, simple, done. "Wonderful," I said. I reached into my handbag, pulled out my own folder, and laid it gently on the glass table. "Before I sign," I said, looking directly at Sarah, "I'd like to place 3 documents into the escrow file for verification." Julian clicked his tongue. "Evelyn, don't waste everyone's time with old historical papers." "Let her present her papers, Mr. Vance," Sarah said, standard procedure kicking in. "Mrs. Vance, what do you have?" I pulled out the first paper. "This is a certified copy of the Whispering Pines Heritage Trust Covenant, registered in Book 412, page 88 of the County Land Records in 1998, I said cleanly. "As you can see, the fee simple title for parcel 44082212 was dissolved 28 years ago. The property is held in an irrevocable land trust." Richard's smile faltered. He looked over at Julian. Julian frowned. "That's ridiculous. The property tax bill comes in her name." "The tax bill comes to the primary trustee," I corrected gently. "Which brings me to my second document." I slid the second paper across the table. "This is the trust agreement governing transfers. It specifies that no deed, contract, or conveyance is valid without 2 signatures, the primary trustee, and the designated officer of the County Land Conservancy. I am the primary trustee. The designated officer is Marcus Vance who, as my employer and co-trustee, has never received, reviewed, or authorized a sale to Aegis Holdings LLC." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes scanning the certified trust seal on the paper. Her expression shifted instantly from polite customer service professionalism to dead seriousness. "Mr. Vance," Sarah said, looking at Julian. "Where did you get the title information for the preliminary filing?" It was pulled from the public registry." Julian stammered, his face losing its color. "She owns the land. She's my wife. I have a power of attorney." "Which brings me to my third document," I said. I pulled out the scanned copy of the power of attorney Julian had filed 3 weeks prior. This document claims I granted Julian full power of attorney on August 4 at 2:15 p.m. at the Westside Branch Bank, I said. It features a signature purporting to be mine, and a notary seal from a Mr. Thomas Miller. I looked Julian square in the eyes. On August 4 at 2:15 p.m., I was giving a guided tour of the County Historical Society archives to 32 members of the State Historical Commission. I logged into our security system with my biometric keycard at 8 a.m. and didn't leave until 5 p.m. I have 62 witnesses, 4 security camera angles, and an electronic audit log. Evelyn. Julian whispered, his voice suddenly small, cracking at the edges. Furthermore, I continued, turning to Richard, Mr. Thomas Miller, the notary whose stamp appears on this fraudulent power of attorney, is Richard's cousin. And Mr. Miller's notary commission was revoked by the state 6 months ago for document tampering. The room went dead silent. Beatrice's mouth was slightly open. Richard stared at the paper in front of him as if it had suddenly caught fire. Sarah, I said quietly to the escrow officer. I believe filing a fraudulent deed instrument and attempting to execute a land closing based on a revoked notary stamp constitutes felony grand theft and fraud under state law, doesn't it? Sarah was already reaching for her desk phone. I am stopping this closing immediately and contacting our legal compliance team and the county sheriff's financial crimes unit. Richard was the first to bolt from his chair. I had nothing to do with the forgery, he yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Julian. Julian brought me the paperwork. He told me she wanted to sell. He said she was depressed and didn't want the hassle. You lied to me. Beatrice shrieked, rounding on her husband. You told me this was a clean investment. Shut up, Beatrice. Julian shouted, standing up so fast his heavy leather chair crashed backward against the drywall. He turned to me, his hands shaking, his polished boardroom demeanor completely shattered into panic. Evelyn, please. Talk to me in private. We can fix this. I was desperate. The firm the investments I lost money on the waterfront project, Evie. They were going to sue me. I know, I said, standing up slowly and smoothing the front of my skirt. I checked your corporate bank accounts 2 days ago, Julian. You didn't just lose money. You used our home equity line of credit as collateral for Richard's development loan. Julian went pale, a sick, gray color that made him look 20 years older. You knew? I'm an archivist, Julian, I said softly. My whole life is finding things people thought they buried. 2 officers from the county sheriff's department arrived at the title office 15 minutes later. Because the attempted closing involved a forged land title valued at over $1 million, the state fraud investigator who had been monitoring Thomas Miller's revoked notary stamp was called directly to the scene. Julian and Richard were escorted out of the building through the main lobby. Beatrice followed behind them, crying loudly, trying to explain to the deputy that she was just an innocent family member who had come along for support. Nobody listened to her. I sat in the conference room with Sarah, signed a formal affidavit of forgery, and collected my original trust documents. As I walked out to my 10-year-old sedan in the parking lot, the midday sun felt warmer than it had in years. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. Because Julian had committed felony fraud against my separate inherited property and attempted to secretly encumber our marital home with unapproved debt, the family court judge ruled decisively in my favor. Julian was forced to forfeit his share of our home's remaining equity to cover the illegal loans he had taken out. He avoided state prison by taking a plea deal, 5 years of felony probation, 300 hours of community service, full financial restitution, and the permanent revocation of his commercial broker's license. He now works as an entry-level inventory clerk for a logistics company 3 counties over. He lives in a small, rented 1-bedroom apartment, and according to my former sister-in-law who hasn't spoken to me since the court date, he spends his weekends trying to pay off his legal fees. Beatrice and Richard filed for bankruptcy 3 months after the incident at the title company. Their shell company was dissolved by the state. As for Whispering Pines, the county finalized the commercial bypass route last month. The Land Conservancy agreed to sell a 2-acre non-essential buffer strip to the county for environmental mitigation at full market rate, generating $850,000 for the Whispering Pines Heritage Trust. I didn't keep a single dollar for luxury cars or expensive clothes. Instead, I used the funds to establish a permanent endowment for the Historical Society, ensuring that young researchers and archivists will always have the resources they need to preserve the truth. I still live in my quiet house. Every weekend, I drive out to Whispering Pines, sit on the front porch my father built, and listen to the wind through the trees. Julian spent 24 years believing I was just a quiet woman who didn't understand the real world. He forgot that the quietest people are often the ones paying the closest attention, and that once a signature is written in history, you can't just trace over it and call it your own. If this story reminded you that being quiet is never the same thing as being weak, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have let him walk into that closing room, or would you have confronted him at home? If you appreciate stories where patience, strategy, and the truth win out over betrayal, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Broken Trust Stories. Thank you for listening.